The room smelled of floor wax and stale lies. I watched Nora adjust her silk blouse, while her lawyer painted me as a leech. I stayed silent, replaying the truth. For 7 years I paid for my sister's medical degree. When she graduated, she took me to court over our grandfather's inheritance. Your only job is to sacrifice. That's your place in this family, she said. During the inheritance hearing, I handed the judge an envelope. The judge simply looked at my sister and burst out laughing. That laughter hadn't happened yet. We were still in the preamble, the part where Nora tried to dissect my character. I'm a private investigator. I notice the things people try to hide in the drywall of their lives. I saw the tremor in Nora's hand and the way she glanced at our mother for reassurance. Mom nodded back, a slow motion that said, "Keep going. We deserve this." They thought this was a formality. They didn't know I counted every single penny. Judge Holloway tapped his pen, a metronome of impatience. He had seen families destroy each other for less than a used sedan. Nora's attorney, a man whose suit cost more than my car, droned on about undue influence. He claimed I isolated our grandfather, Henry, in his final months. He used words like fiduciary breach and cognitive decline. It was a good story. It was almost compelling enough to make me forget I was the one who bought the ink for their printer. "Miss Cole," the judge said, cutting through the lawyer's expensive fog. "Do you have a response?" I didn't stand up immediately. I let the silence hang there, heavy and suffocating. Nora smirked, a tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth that vanished instantly. She thought I was cowed. She thought I was the same sister who ate instant noodles so she could order sushi. I picked up the manila envelope on the defense table. It was heavy, thick with 7 years of receipts. Eva gave me a sharp nod. I walked to the bench, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the parquet floor. The bailiff stepped forward, but the judge waved him off. I placed the brick of paper on the polished wood. The rubber band holding it together was strained to the breaking point, much like my patience. "It isn't a legal brief, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "It is the math. Every dollar, every date, every lie." Judge Holloway slid the envelope closer. He snapped the rubber band, the sound like a gunshot. He pulled out the first stack: bank transfers for tuition, rent checks signed by me, credit card statements for textbooks. He flipped a page, then another, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. He looked at the total sum highlighted at the bottom of the spreadsheet. Then he looked at Nora, who had gone very pale. The corner of his mouth twitched, and the laughter began to bubble up. The spreadsheet on the judge's bench was clean, white, and orderly. But it didn't smell like the instant ramen I ate for 3 years straight. It didn't capture the sound of my 2004 Corolla, a vehicle held together by rust and prayer, coughing in the dead of winter. I called that car the drumline, because of the way the engine rattled when I idled at red lights. I drove it to surveillance gigs that paid in cash and frostbite. To Nora, money was magic. To me, it was blood. I spent my nights in cold sedans, watching unfaithful husbands leave motels. The heating didn't work, so I wore 2 pairs of socks and drank coffee that tasted like battery acid. Every $100 I earned went into an envelope, then into Nora's bank account. I paid for her textbooks, the ones with the pristine stickers still on the plastic. I paid for her scrubs, her exam fees, and her rent in a building with a doorman. My own apartment had a view of a dumpster and a lock that stuck. Sunday dinners were the theater of the absurd. Mom cooked pot roast that was always slightly dry, and Dad told stories where he was the hero. Nora sat at the head of the table, radiating the exhaustion of the chosen one. She complained about her rotation schedule while checking Instagram under the table. "I don't have time to sleep," she'd say, "let alone budget." I would nod, chewing quietly. When the check came, nobody moved. My hand always slid the debit card across the tablecloth. The night everything shifted started in my mother's kitchen. The refrigerator hummed like a nervous throat while I chopped onions for the sauce. Nora swept in, her fresh white coat folded over her arm like a royal cape. "Take tomorrow off?" Mom said, not looking up from the salad she was tossing. "Nora needs you to drive her downtown for the ceremony." I paused, the knife hovering over a half-diced onion. "I have a case," I said. "I can't just leave." Nora opened her mail on the counter like she owned the surface of the earth. "Don't pull your PI thing where you go ghost, Genesis. I need you there." She didn't look at me. "I've never missed a payment," I said, my voice low. "You miss a lot," she countered, finally meeting my eyes with a clinical detachment. "You just hide it by paying." It stung, but I kept chopping. Onion tears are useful camouflage when your sister decides to dissect you. Then my mother added the final cut. Her voice almost gentle. "Your only job is to sacrifice, honey. That's your place in this family." I set the knife down on the cutting board. The wood was scarred from years of use, just like my bank account. "My job," I repeated. Mom smiled, a soft expression that didn't reach her hard eyes. "You are good at support, not center stage. Let Nora shine." The room felt tilted, like a photo hung crooked on a wall. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table and show them the overdraft fees I collected so Nora could have her shine. Instead, I wiped the board and bagged the onions. "I'll drive her," I said. That was the lie I told myself to survive. I convinced myself I was investing in a person, not a bottomless pit. I didn't know then that investments usually yield returns. But family debts are the only ones that accrue interest forever. Grandpa Henry died on a Tuesday that felt far too bright for grief. While I stood by the grave, trying to remember the smell of his pipe tobacco, Nora checked her watch. She was calculating time lost from residency matches, tapping her foot on the soft earth. My parents accepted condolences, like they were accepting awards for best mourners, shaking hands with a practiced solemnity. I didn't say a word to anyone. I just touched the cold marble of his headstone. The will reading happened 3 days later in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and greed. Mr. Henderson, Henry's attorney, sat behind a mahogany desk that looked like a barricade. Mom smoothed her skirt, projecting an air of tragic dignity that felt rehearsed. Dad made small talk about golf, as if we weren't there to divide a life into percentages. Nora tapped her phone, impatient. "Let's get this over with," she whispered. "I have rounds at 6. Mom leaned in, her perfume cloying and sweet. "Now, Genesis. About the assets," she murmured, low enough so Henderson wouldn't hear. "Nora needs the equity to start her practice. We expect you to be reasonable." "Reasonable how?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "She's made sacrifices. Mom said, eyes wide and innocent. She deserves the house. It wasn't a request, it was a script I was expected to follow. I looked at the empty chair where Henry should have been. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, a dry, papery sound that silenced the room. To my son and daughter-in-law, I leave the lake cabin's contents and my library, he read. Dad blinked, clearly expecting more than old books. To my granddaughter Nora, Henderson continued, pausing to adjust his glasses. Nora straightened up, putting on her best humble face. I leave a 20% interest in the cabin property. The silence that followed was absolute. Nora's smile faltered. That's it. Henderson ignored her outburst and turned a page. To my granddaughter Genesis, he said, looking directly at me. I leave my primary residence, my 1958 Omega watch, and the remaining 80% of my investment portfolio. The air left the room. Mom looked like she'd been slapped. In recognition of services rendered, Henderson added, reading the clause with emphasis, and for being the only one who never asked for a thing. I felt the blood rush to my face. That's a mistake, Dad said, his voice booming. Henry was confused near the end. He didn't mean that. Nora stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. He promised me support for the practice, she said, pointing a trembling finger at the document. Genesis manipulated him. She was over there every day. Mr. Henderson didn't flinch. The will is sound, Dr. Cole. Drafted 2 years ago. When he was perfectly lucid. Mom's eyes went cold, like a shark smelling blood. There is one final item, Henderson said. He reached into his drawer and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. A personal letter. He slid it across the mahogany, but not to Nora. He slid it to me. He wanted you to have this immediately. I picked it up. It felt heavy, like it held a heartbeat inside. On the front, in Henry's shaky script, was a simple instruction. Read this when they tell you you are selfish. I didn't open it. The silence following the will reading wasn't peaceful, it was tactical. For 2 weeks. My phone stayed dark, while theirs lit up like a Christmas tree. I found out about the family core group chat when Dad accidentally forwarded a message meant for Mom. It was a strategy document disguised as a conversation. She'll fold if we press the sentimental angle, Nora wrote. She hates conflict. They were right about the old Genesis. They hadn't met the new one yet. The call came at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, calculated to catch me tired. Nora's voice was wrapped in a performative fatigue that usually made me open my wallet. Hey, Jen, she said, using the nickname she only deployed when she needed something. I am on break at the hospital. Look. We need to fix this mess Grandpa made. She spoke as if Henry had spilled milk, rather than drafted a legal document. He was confused, she added. But we can correct it. I sent over a PDF, Nora continued. The sound of a pager beeping rhythmically in the background. It's a quitclaim deed. Standard stuff. She explained it like I was a slow child. You sign the house over to me for a token sum. I'll get a mortgage and pay you out eventually. Eventually. That word was doing heavy lifting. It's cleaner this way, she said. You don't even want a house. You live like a nomad anyway. It's wasted on you. I looked at the email attachment on my laptop screen. It was already filled out, waiting for my signature. My hand hovered over the mouse, a ghost of my old reflex, to please them twitching in my fingers. Then I looked at the Omega watch on my wrist. It ticked steadily, unlike my heart. No, I said. The word felt foreign, sharp, and heavy in my mouth. On the other end of the line, the silence was absolute. What did you say? I said, no, Nora. I want the house. The line crackled with static. Her voice dropped the exhaustion act and went flat and cold. Don't be selfish, Genesis. It's ugly on you. She let out a short, harsh breath. Grandpa wanted what was best for the doctor in the family. He wrote that down wrong because he was slipping. She laughed, a brittle sound. You are obsessed with rules because you don't understand love. You think transactions are relationships. That accusation cut deep, but her next words severed the nerve completely. Besides, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, I saw your bank statements on Mom's desk last Sunday. You have savings. You have that settlement from the insurance case. I froze. You don't need the equity, she hissed. I have loans. I have a reputation to build. You're hoarding resources you don't even know how to use. She wasn't asking for help. She was auditing my existence. I realized then that my privacy had been violated long before the will was read. They had been tracking my solvency to calculate their own safety net. This conversation is over, I said, and ended the call before she could reply. I stared at the dark screen, my hand trembling slightly. That was the moment I realized my sister didn't see me as a sibling. To Nora, I was just an asset she hadn't finished liquidating. The process server didn't look like an executioner. He looked like a guy who wanted his lunch break, wearing a fading windbreaker and chewing gum with an open mouth. He handed me the thick packet on my front porch with a bored shrug. Sign here, please. I signed my name, my hand steady despite the sudden drop in my stomach. I flipped to the first page. Petition to contest will and restitution of family support funds. The legal jargon was sharp, sterile, and designed to bleed me dry. I sat on my hallway floor and read Nora's version of history. The document claimed I had systematically isolated Henry during a period of severe cognitive decline. It cited dates where I had visited him alone, twisting kindness into predation. Every grocery run I made for him was reimagined as a gatekeeping tactic. The language was clinical, stripping away the love and leaving only a skeleton of manipulation. It sounded like a bad television show, script written by someone who hated me deeply. For an hour, I let the old programming take over. My chest felt tight, a familiar constriction that whispered, fix it. I could end this today. I could sign the house over, apologize for sins I didn't commit, and be invited back to Sunday dinner. I could be the good sister one last time. The silence in the house felt heavy, accusing me of destroying the family peace. I reached for my phone to call Nora's lawyer. I almost dialed the number. My thumb hovered over the call button, but then I saw the dust motes dancing in the light from the window. Henry loved this light. If I gave this up, I wasn't just losing a house, I was agreeing with their lie. I put the phone down and walked to the master bedroom closet. I pulled back the loose floorboard I'd fixed years ago. Underneath sat my fireproof safe. I spun the dial, left, right, left. The click was the sound of a loaded gun. Inside lay a thick, rubber, banded brick of paper labeled Project Nora. I hadn't opened it in months. I pulled it out, feeling the weight of 7 years of bank transfers. tuition receipts, rent checks, Venmo logs for emergency, Uber rides. I had kept everything. Not because I planned to sue, but because my profession taught me that people lie, even the ones who share your DNA. I spread the papers on the floor. It wasn't just money, it was a map of my servitude. I picked up my phone again, but I didn't call Nora. I called Eva. She picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp and professional. "Did you get served?" she asked. "Yes," I said, looking at the sea of paper on my floor. "And I am done being the wallet, Eva. I want to file a countersuit." "Good," she said. "Bring me everything you have." I started gathering the files, stacking my defense against their fiction. But I wasn't done searching yet. I went to Henry's old oak desk in the study to find a larger folder. The top drawer still smelled of his peppermints. I reached to the back, behind a stack of old National Geographics, and my fingers brushed against smooth paper. It was a second envelope. Identical to the one Mr. Henderson had given me, but the seal was unbroken. In Henry's shaky hand, it read for Nora. To be opened only if she asks for more. Nora took the stand wearing a shade of blue that screamed innocence. She sat with her hands folded, looking small against the dark wood of the witness box. Her attorney guided her through the script. She spoke of Grandpa Henry with a tragic fondness, painting a picture of a man lost in the fog of dementia. "He didn't know what he was signing," she said, her voice trembling. Genesis was always there, whispering in his ear. It was a masterclass in fiction. Then came the waterworks. She described how hard she worked during residency, claiming I used family funds to control her. "I just wanted to make him proud," she sobbed, dabbing her eyes with a tissue her lawyer provided. The judge leaned forward, his expression softening. I watched my mother in the gallery nod in agreement. They were rewriting my life in real time, turning my generosity into a weapon. I felt the old anger simmer, hot and sharp, but I kept my face blank. I knew what was in my briefcase. Eva stood up for cross-examination, looking like a shark smelling blood. She didn't raise her voice. She simply asked Nora to confirm her statement that she had supported herself through medical school. "Mostly," Nora said, shifting in her seat. "My parents helped when they could, but I lived lean." Eva nodded, glancing at the judge. "So, you would characterize your sister's financial contribution as minimal?" Nora looked at me, her eyes hard. "Non-existent," she lied. "She only paid for things when she wanted something in return." That was the cue. Eva signaled to me, and I stood up. I walked to the bench with the heavy manila envelope I had prepared. The courtroom went silent as I set it down. It wasn't just paper, it was a brick of undeniable facts. "Your Honor," Eva said. "This is Exhibit A." The judge looked at the thick stack, then at me. I didn't smile. I just watched Nora's confidence flicker. She recognized the handwriting on the tabs. She knew exactly what I had been hoarding. The judge cut the rubber band. The snap echoed like a pistol shot. He began to turn the pages. Tuition transfers, rent checks, credit card payoffs for vacations she claimed were conferences. The total amounts were highlighted in neon yellow. The judge's brow furrowed. He looked from the ledger to Nora, who was now gripping the railing. The narrative of the independent doctor was crumbling under the weight of 7 years of receipts. The silence was no longer respectful. It was heavy with the sudden, suffocating presence of the truth. "This is a significant sum, Miss Cole," the judge said, his voice dry. Nora's lawyer jumped up, objecting on grounds of relevance. "It goes to character, Your Honor," Eva countered calmly. "And to the claim of undue influence. The plaintiff alleges my client coerced the deceased for money. The evidence suggests the flow of cash went entirely the other way." The judge overruled the objection. Nora's face flushed a patchy red. She looked at Mom, but Mom was staring at her shoes. The isolation was beginning. I wasn't finished. I reached into my bag and pulled out the second envelope. The cream-colored one I found in Henry's desk. "We also submit Exhibit B," Eva announced. "A letter left by the deceased, specifically for the plaintiff." The bailiff handed it to Nora. She held it like it was radioactive. "Open it, please," the judge instructed. Nora's fingers trembled as she broke the wax seal. She unfolded the paper, scanning the familiar shaky script. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked physically ill. "Read it for the record," the judge ordered. Nora swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. "Nora, if you are reading this, you have asked for more than your share yet again." She stopped, looking up pleadingly. The judge gestured for her to continue. "The house belongs to Genesis because she is the only one who never treated me like a bank. You have taken enough. Be a doctor, stop being a child." The words hung in the air, sharp and cruel in their honesty. The room felt airless. Nora crumpled the letter in her fist. "He didn't write this," she stammered, her voice rising. "He was confused. He didn't know what he was saying." "Genesis must have forged it." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She wrote this to humiliate me." Her lawyer put a hand on her arm. But she shook him off. Desperation is a loud scent, and Nora reeked of it. She was drowning, and she was trying to pull everyone down with her. The judge watched, unimpressed. Eva looked at me. It was time for the final nail. "Your Honor," Eva said, cutting through Nora's hysterics. The plaintiff claims the deceased was mentally incompetent and that this letter is a forgery. We have one final piece of evidence to authenticate his state of mind. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. It was small, silver, and cold. I had saved the file years ago. Nora froze. She recognized the flash drive. She knew exactly what day I had recorded that video in the kitchen. The bailiff plugged the drive into the court's laptop with a mechanical indifference. The screen flickered to life, projecting a pixelated image of my grandfather's kitchen onto the white wall. Nora stopped breathing. She knew this day. It was 2 years before he died, back when she still visited him to ask for loans she never repaid. The timestamp in the corner glowed neon green, the 12th of August, 2021. The audio crackled, filling the sterile room with the warm, raspy sound of Henry's voice. It sounded like a ghost testifying. On screen, Henry sat at his kitchen table, the Omega watch loose on his wrist. He looked directly into the camera lens, his eyes sharp, clear, and undeniably healthy. "Sweetheart," he said, addressing the person holding the camera, "me. I want this recorded. When Nora becomes a doctor, she is to pay you back. Every single dollar. We will write it down." He chuckled, a sound that made my chest ache. "She's smart, but she forgets who buys the ink." The video ended with him winking. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bone. Nora stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. "That was a joke," she said, her voice high and thin. "He joked like that. We joked as a family." The judge leaned back in his leather chair. He looked at the video frame, then at the letter, and finally at Nora. He exhaled slowly through his nose. Then, he did something I had never seen a judge do. He laughed out loud. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but it was disbelieving. It was the sound of a man who had just heard the world's most brazen lie delivered with a straight face. He took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. "Counsel," he said to Nora's lawyer, his voice trembling with mirth. "Your client's position is untenable. Unless she wishes to proceed to trial and pay everyone's legal fees for the privilege, I suggest you take 5 minutes to discuss dismissal with prejudice." He smiled dryly and grimly. He added one final blow, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Also, Miss Cole, your sister is not a bank." Nora stared at the defense table, her face a mask of shock. Mom reached for her hand across the divider and missed. Dad looked suddenly very old. The laughter stopped echoing, but the damage was done. The gavel didn't fall because there wasn't one, but something inside me did. It was the clean, sharp crack of a rope, finally snapping under too much weight. We settled in the hallway 10 minutes later. Settled is a generous word for a surrender. Eva drafted a 1-page agreement on a bench, while a bailiff ate a blueberry muffin 3 feet away. Nora withdrew everything. She agreed not to contest the will. She agreed to stop contacting my clients with her concerned sister emails. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue sanctions for a frivolous lawsuit. She signed the paper so hard the pen tore through the page. She wouldn't look at me. Mom tried to spin it immediately. She stepped into my personal space, smelling of anxiety and expensive floral perfume. "This was just a misunderstanding," she said, her voice wavering. "A family fight. We can move past this." I looked at her. Really looked at her, for the first time in years. "You told me my place was to sacrifice," I said. She flinched as if I had raised a hand. I was upset, Genesis. "You know how I get." "Yes," I said. "You were honest." Nora finally looked up. She had folded Grandpa's letter, so small it looked like a secret she was trying to swallow. "You humiliated me," she said quietly. "You sued me," I replied. "That video was the only reason you couldn't lie your way through me, like you've done since you were 12. She stiffened, her eyes wet with angry tears. "You think I am a villain. I work so hard." "So did I said. But only one of us sent the other a bill for it. We stood there holding our baggage claim tickets for a relationship that had never really arrived." Dad cleared his throat, looking at his watch. "Well," he said, trying to force normalcy into the wreckage, "we could get brunch. There is a place around the corner." Eva made a face like she smelled something dead. "I can't," I said. "I have to get back to work." The refusal hung in the air. It wasn't an excuse. It was the first boundary of the rest of my life. I didn't wait for them to argue. I turned and walked toward the exit signs. The heavy courthouse doors swung open, pushing me out into the blinding afternoon sun. I reached into my pocket and felt the cool metal of my car keys and the jagged edge of the house key. They were heavy. But for the first time in 7 years, I wasn't carrying anyone else's weight. I didn't look back to see if they were watching. I already knew they were behind me. The house didn't feel big anymore. It felt like a coat that finally fit. I spent my Saturday morning on the front porch with a screwdriver and a box of galvanized screws. The front step had sagged for a decade. A tripping hazard my father always promised to fix but never did. I replaced the rotted wood myself. The silence in the neighborhood wasn't empty, it was heavy with potential. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for a text. I just drove the screws in, watching the wood dust spiral into the air like tiny, golden ghosts. Inside, the kitchen table was no longer a war zone of invoices. I opened my laptop and logged into the student loan portal. The balance stared back at me, a number that had lived in my nightmares for 7 years. With the inheritance money transferred, I clicked Pay in full. It was anti-climactic. No confetti fell from the ceiling. Just a green check mark and a zero balance. I sat there listening to the refrigerator hum, realizing that the noise in my head had finally stopped. I was no longer a walking overdraft. My work changed too. I stopped taking the cash jobs that felt like poison, the ones where landlords wanted dirt on tenants. I took an elder abuse case the next week. It felt good to use my skills, to protect someone who couldn't protect themselves. I found a missing dog for a crying woman and didn't charge for the last hour. People still told me I was so strong, but they meant I was good at suffering. I was done with that definition. Strength wasn't carrying the furniture, it was locking the door. The mail slot clacked on a rainy Tuesday. There was no return address on the white envelope, but I recognized the handwriting. It was sharp, jagged, and rushed. Inside was a cashier's check for $500. No note, no apology, no love. Nora. Just a ledger entry admitting a debt she had sworn didn't exist. It wasn't enough to fix the past, but it was enough to prove she knew the truth. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a quiet, clinical satisfaction. I put the check in a new folder labeled Cabin Fund. I drove to the lake that weekend. The cabin smelled of pine needles and damp wool, exactly as Henry had left it. I walked out onto the dock as the sun began to dip below the tree line. The water was glass, reflecting a sky that belonged only to me. I looked down at the Omega watch on my wrist. It was a heavy piece of metal, scratched from years of use, but it kept perfect time. I wound the stem, feeling the resistance. I wasn't waiting for permission to be here anymore. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the old group chat. Mom sending a picture of a sunset, trying to bait a response. I didn't feel the old pull of guilt. I didn't feel the need to smooth things over. I opened the settings and selected delete and leave. The chat vanished, replaced by a blank screen. The sun touched the water, turning the world gold. I took a deep breath of cold air. My job wasn't to sacrifice. My job wasn't to fix. My only job was to live.